Greetings, everybody. We're nearing the end of the Unit 5, and we're going to focus in here at the end with topic 5.15, which is sustainable agriculture, right? Remember those enduring understandings. When humans use natural resources, they alter natural systems, but humans can mitigate their impact on land and water resources through sustainable use. Now, I do want to point one thing out in the image in the background here, which I have shamefully robbed from Google. But um, you know, this image that you're looking at looks very different from the industrialized monoculture fields and fields of wheat or fields and fields of corn that dominate much of the landscape in the Midwest and even here in our corner of the woods in Walla Walla, right? What we see is a system that is not nature and what exactly what nature do, but I do want you to notice that it very well mimics what nature does. We have diversity in this system on this sustainable farm in the background, and that's going to be just an important note to make as we proceed. All right. Please make sure you follow up and do your part with the reading, just from chapter 12 from the Miller textbook, sections 12.5 and 12.6, pages 360 through 369. All right. So let's define sustainable agriculture, shall we? Right? Obviously, we want to make sure that we are producing enough food for all people to meet their nutritional needs. All right. It is a noble goal of the farming and agricultural world. Now, to make this process sustainable, though, obviously we need to be able to do this in such a way that we maintain soil quality so that we can grow plants again and again and again indefinitely, that we're not overly burdening our local water resources, that we're minimizing or mitigating the impacts of pollution that might come from the use of pesticides and chemical fertilizers, or crop and animal waste for that matter. Um, and when we set the system up, that we're trying to make it friendly to the local wildlife, both plants and animals, and the pollinators and the mammals and the other organisms that we share the planet with, right? Uh, and the a big issue, and this is something that we'll tackle in the next unit, is finding some way to not rely so darned heavily on fossil fuel energy inputs to the system to make it all work, right? So again, in our typical industrialized farm, right, we have diesel powered machinery to plow and to cultivate, right? We have diesel machinery then that comes in to harvest, and then we have to package, ship, and transport that food all over the country, right? We actually use fossil fuel energy often to convert atmospheric nitrogen into chemical fertilizers, nitrogen-based fertilizers, right? This is a big hurdle to get over there, and it's probably better discussed in Unit 6 when we talk about energy. But we're going to talk about the rest of these. All right, so let's start with soil. Obviously, we need to make sure that we are protecting our soil resource, right? Probably the single biggest or most important component aside from water availability that we need to manage, right? So we're going to talk about these six methods that you see right here, and the role they can play in helping to maintain our soil quality and prevent soil erosion. All right. So let's start with low-till or no-till agriculture. So typically, when a farmer prepares a field to plant crops, they're going to go in and plow. What that does is that loosens that topsoil, right? Makes it less compacted, and then they'll drop the seeds in there, and that leaves room for air and water and roots to grow in that topsoil. All right. But when plowing it and then making that topsoil so loose, they also, for the time until the plants have established themselves with roots, leave that soil very, very vulnerable to wind and water erosion. Right? So the ideal with low-till or no-till agriculture is to try to leave as much of the soil and previous year's crop residues in place to help hold that soil in place, and really only plowing or tilling small localized areas. And what that does is that helps leave more of the soil protected through root systems and less of it prone to wind and water erosion. All right. Now, like we see here in our neck of the woods up in the Walla Walla Valley, we have lots of farming done on hillsides, rolling hillsides. All right. So when farmers do plow, you'll notice that they do so and it follows a certain pattern. And this is actually what's called contour plowing. And contour plowing, what it does is as they plow and dig these channels, right, they're doing so perpendicular to the slope. Right, so if it's kind of difficult to tell the way this picture can now, but if I could draw a line perpendicular to these, that would be the downhill direction. So, for example, if water, right, rains from the sky and turns into runoff, is going to want to travel downhill, right? By plowing perpendicular to the slope of that hill, it helps slow down the movement of that water and therefore reduce the amount of soil erosion we would get until the plants have a chance to establish themselves. Um, Now, if we go to a more extreme, like very steep hills, and mountainous areas where we still farm, right? Rather than like contour plowing, for example, is they'll dig these flat areas in the hillside called terraces, right? And the idea here again is this would be highly erodible land otherwise, because anytime you had a heavy rainfall, for example, that water would rush downhill and carry much of the soil with it. By digging these flat areas, as the water falls on that flat surface, there is no tendency for that water to run downhill, and therefore we are allowing soil to build up and maintain itself on those terraces. All right. Um, Other things that we can do to help prevent soil erosion are what's called strip cropping. Now, this is actually a pretty cool idea here, but um, the idea being that you plant two separate crops side by side that are grown and harvested at different time intervals throughout the year. And we can actually see examples of this between Waitsburg and Dayton up on the hillside in our neck of the woods here. But notice the alternating stripes here. So as one crop is cut and harvested, leaving the soil bare, we have these strips of currently growing crops in place, right, that help to protect the soil in the meantime. And then as that crop then grows and is harvested, where the idea being the other strips are now growing new crops. Okay. Uh, you can plant what are called perennial crops, and perennial crops are crops that we don't harvest in their entirety. So, like strawberries, for example, you plant strawberries, um, and those grow, and we harvest the berry, but we leave the plants in place um, to come back and grow the next year to grow new strawberries. What's nice about that is by leaving the plants in place, that root system is maintained and it can help soil keep the soil in place. Now you'll notice here, probably from a garden bed, but there's some straw there too, and that helps to maintain soil moisture and protect the topsoil a little bit too. All right. Now, in particularly windy areas, and again, you're going to see these windbreaks right here in the Walla Walla Valley as well. Um, the purpose of these windbreaks is in windy areas where we might be prone to wind erosion, which we definitely are here in the Columbia Basin, right? Which is why we have all the wind turbines around here, by the way. You plant these rows of trees, and what they do is they help protect the adjacent fields and soil from heavy winds. They sort of slow that wind down or break it, preventing the wind from picking up that soil and carrying it away. All right. So uh, lots of different strategies we can use, lots of different tools to use to help slow down or prevent the erosion of our soil, one of our most precious resources, an obvious, super important resource when it comes to growing food. All right. Now, what if we have soil that has is poor quality and we want to improve it, right? We have to remember that soil is a renewable resource. Um, so if we have mineral particles in place, there are tricks we can use, tools we can apply to improve soil quality. One of those is crop rotation. Another is what's called green manure, and we'll talk about what that means here. You can also use compost or fertilizer, um, or there's what are called soil additives that you can use to adjust soil pH. All right. So let's talk about the purpose of crop rotation. Now, we did talk about this just a couple topics ago with integrated pest management, right? So through crop rotation, we can help control populations of pest species, right? But another really important role that crop rotation plays is in both improving and maintaining the quality of our soil. All right. So as you guys may remember from a previous unit, um, so different types of crops have a tendency to require different types of nutrients for the soil. And most of those nutrients, though, can be replenished through natural biogeochemical cycles. All right. But if we were to grow corn, say year after year, we're going to see a fairly rapid depletion in nitrogen. Or corn is a very nitrogen hungry plant, right? So growing corn year after year on the same plot of land is going to deplete that soil of nitrogen fairly rapidly. All right. Now, if we were to follow that corn up in the next growing season with, say, like a soybean or another what are called legume. So legume plants are like soybeans, peas, garbanzo beans, peanuts, in fact, and they have a tendency to replenish nitrogen in soil because they have different biochemical cycles, different symbiont organisms that tend to accompany them. But legume plants tend to replenish uh, nitrogen compounds, right? And so what you're seeing here is an example of a rotation. Now you'll see that in between the corn crop, we have this idea of what's called a cover crop, and we'll talk about what that cover crop can do for us here next. All right. So I can use what's called green manure. Now, green manure is just simply the idea of planting a what's called a cover crop. So it'd be a really low input crop that you plant in between your harvest cycles. And what that does is it could just be something as simple as a really fast growing grass or something, right? But the idea is that when you plant this cover crop, you then plow that crop into the topsoil before planting the next. And what that does is essentially uh, the green manure or the plant that you've plowed into the soil will die and decompose and slowly release nitrogen, phosphorus, carbon back into the soil for the new plant that you've just planted. Okay. Now we have to also acknowledge the fact that chemical fertilizers do have their place, right? So organic agriculture, the goal is to completely eliminate the use of chemical pesticides and chemical fertilizers and make use of things like green manure or organic fertilizers. But fertilizers can be applied as long as they're done so in such a way that it's not sterilizing the soil and that it's not harmful to wildlife and not polluting waterways. So it's not necessarily entirely unsustainable to use judiciously chemical fertilizers, much like with the integrated pest management that we already talked about. Uh, we're using as many tools as we can, all right, to control pest populations with integrated pest management. One of those tools is chemical pesticides. Uh, with improving soil quality, we want to use as many tools as we can, working with nature and mimicking nature as much as we can. But another tool that's come about through technology is judicious use of chemical fertilizers, as long as they're used appropriately in the right quantities, uh, probably considered a sustainable process. All right. Now we can also use soil additives, which maybe don't supply directly chemical nutrients that plants need, but they can adjust the pH of the soil. Um, so one of those additives is like limestone, right? Limestone, calcium carbonate, which hopefully you guys recognize from back in our carbon cycle unit. Calcium carbonate is a very good acid, naturally occurring neutralizer. And so if you have a really acidic soil that maybe isn't the right pH for the types of plants you want to grow, you can add lime or limestone to it. That'll neutralize that pH and bring it back closer to more alkaline. Remembering that most plants do pretty well in a fairly neutral soil. All right. Moving on. So that is maintaining soil quality, preventing soil erosion, and improving soil quality. Another really important part of agriculture is the raising of livestock. And one of the big concerns with raising livestock is this process of overgrazing, so degrading our land, desertification that can occur from time to time through improper grazing of our livestock species. All right. Now the good news is there are good ways to graze animals that can not only help prevent this idea of overgrazing desertification, but can actually improve grasslands to a better state than they would be if left entirely alone, because it mimics the evolutionary relationship that existed for millennia between large grazing herds such as bison and our grasslands, right? So the idea is you bring a herd of cattle. So if you have X number of acres, you separate that pasture into what are called paddocks or sections, if you will. All right. The idea being that you use portable fencing or fencing, right, to keep all of the herd in just one particular section of that pasture at a time. You let them graze up to a certain point. Now, when they've eaten enough of the grass, and essentially mowed it down to a certain point, you then move that herd to the next paddock. All right, thereby letting the grass that has just been eaten to replenish itself. Now, another important thing to consider there is as the cows eat the grass in that paddock, right? They're both urinating and pooping essentially directly on that soil. And that acts as a nice little fertilizer to help return the nitrogen, phosphorus, and other elements that grasses need and fertilize that so the grasses can grow back, right? And then they do the next thing. And then by the time they've rotated back around, right, this area will have completely replenished itself just to start that process over again. All right. Now, the nice thing about this is it's extremely low input. The idea being we have grasses that just simply need water. All right. The cows eat the grass, right? The grass, they poop and pee on the grass to refertilize that soil. They move, that grass regenerates and grows back even thicker and more lush than perhaps before the cows arrived. All right. Um, Now, ultimately, in a sustainable farm, the idea is to sort of mimic nature. We're not trying to match the exact natural ecosystem, which is impossible. We're trying to create an use the tools of ecology, right? And all those interrelationships that exist to create a system that produces high yield, high nutrition foods, right? Uh, but limits impacts to soil quality and in many ways will improve it, right? That is friendly to the local wildlife and pollinators, right? That doesn't put an overdue strain on local waterways, all right? And creates this system that's in balance with the natural cycles that Earth provides. And remember, that definition of sustainability that we are using is that we're providing what humans need within the confines of what nature can replenish. And when we mimic nature in our agricultural systems, we're creating a system that's much friendlier and much less invasive to our wildlife, helps to maintain biodiversity, and helps to create a system that will heal the land and allow us to indefinitely produce food, high quality food.